The morning my wife was lowered into the ground, I stood at the graveside and thought about how she always said I was too quiet, too steady, too predictable. She wasn't wrong. I've spent 63 years being the kind of man who shows up on time, pays his bills early, and keeps his mouth shut when he should probably speak. My name is Daniel. I retired 2 years ago from 31 years of civil engineering. I have a daughter named Claire who lives in Portland, a son named Marcus who lives 12 minutes from me, and until 8 months ago, I had a wife of 38 years named Renee. I also had a savings account with $412,000 in it. I don't have that anymore either, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where things started to feel wrong, not where they actually went wrong. Because I've since learned those are two very different moments. It was a Tuesday in March when Marcus called me from the hospital. Not about himself, about me. He'd been trying to reach me for 2 hours. He said, because my neighbor had called him after seeing me sit down on my front porch steps and not get up for 40 minutes in the cold. I hadn't realized I'd been out there that long. I'd gone outside to get the mail and then just sat down. My chest felt like someone had stacked textbooks on it. On that B1. Slow and patient. The cardiologist used the phrase, significant cardiac event, and then paused, waiting for my reaction. The way doctors do when they expect you to fall apart. I asked him when I could go home. He told me I'd be there for at least 4 days. There was a blockage. There would be a procedure in the morning. He said it with the gravity of someone delivering news that should rearrange a person's entire world. What I remember thinking, in that moment, was that I needed to call my wife, Sandra. I'll call my second wife Sandra, which is her name, had been in Denver for 6 days at that point. Her sister, she'd told me. It was going through a difficult stretch. Depression, maybe something more serious. Sandra said. She looked at me over her coffee cup that Thursday morning and said she might be gone for 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I told her to take whatever time she needed. I meant it. I called her from the hospital bed, the IV line taped to the back of my hand, the monitor beeping its steady, indifferent rhythm beside me. She didn't answer. I called again an hour later. Voicemail. I texted. In the hospital. Heart issue. Procedure tomorrow morning. Call me when you can. She called back 40 minutes later. The connection was slightly strange. The way calls sound when someone is in a large open space and speaking quietly to avoid being overheard. Daniel. Just my name? Flut. I told her what the cardiologist had said. The blockage, the procedure, that it was serious, but they'd caught it. I heard myself speaking and I sounded steady. Because that's how I sound. And I remember thinking that maybe being steady my whole life had cost me something, the ability to communicate urgency, to signal to the people I loved that I needed them. She said, I'm glad they found it in time. I waited for her to say she was coming. She didn't say that. She said she hoped the procedure went smoothly and that she'd talk to me afterward. I lay in that hospital bed for a long time after we hung up, listening to the monitor, watching the ceiling tile. Marcus came that night and sat with me until visiting hours ended. He didn't say much. He got it from me. The quietness. Claire called from Portland and cried a little, which surprised me and made me feel guilty for causing it. The procedure the next morning took about 2 hours. They told me it went well. I woke up in recovery and the first thing I did was look at my phone. There was one message from Sandra. Thinking of you. Rest. That was it. Something shifted in me then. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in movies. With swelling music and a sudden revelation. It was quieter than that, just a small, cold adjustment. Like a compass needle correcting itself. I started paying attention differently. I'd been retired for 2 years. Sandra had another 4 years until her own retirement from the pharmaceutical company where she worked in regional sales. We'd been married for 9 years. My first wife, Caroline Marcus and Claire's mother had died of ovarian cancer 11 years ago. And Sandra had come into my life about 18 months after that. Through mutual friends at a dinner party I almost didn't attend. She was warm then. She laughed easily. She made me feel like being quiet wasn't a flaw. In the months before the hospital, I'd noticed small things. She was on her phone more. Not in an obvious way. Sandra was never obvious about anything, but I'd walk into a room and there'd be that slight adjustment. Screen angle shifting. Topic changing. She started going to the gym at odd hours. She took a weekend trip to see a college friend in Scottsdale in January that she mentioned only the week before she left. She'd been spending more time with a colleague named Robert, who'd transferred to her regional office in the fall. She mentioned Robert with the studied casualness of someone who has practiced, not mentioning someone too much. I noticed. I filed it away. I said nothing. Because I was steady, predictable, quiet Daniel. And I convinced myself that a man my age who'd already lost one wife should be careful about seeing shadows in ordinary things. From the hospital, I came home to an empty house. Sandra extended her stay in Denver. Her sister needed her. 2 more weeks. She said. She called every other day. Conversations that lasted 10 or 12 minutes. Always at times when she seemed to be stepping away from somewhere. I healed. I did my cardiac rehab exercises in the living room with the television on low. Marcus came by twice a week and pretended he wasn't checking on me. Claire sent a meal delivery subscription that kept arriving in boxes on my porch. It was on a Thursday, 5 weeks after the procedure, that I logged into our joint account to pay the quarterly property tax. I sat down slowly when I saw the balance, $11,241. I have a habit, an engineer's habit, of knowing my numbers. The account had carried $412,000. It had been there for years, accumulated from a combination of my retirement savings, partial withdrawal, the sale of a property I'd inherited from my parents, and 3 decades of careful living. It was our emergency fund. Our cushion, the thing I pointed to when I couldn't sleep. I went back through the transaction history the way you go back through something you've read but didn't absorb. Slowly, looking at every line. There were 14 transfers over the previous 11 weeks, each one between $20,000 and $40,000, all of them to an account I didn't recognize. The transfers had started in January the same week. Sandra went to Scottsdale. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called my attorney, a man named Gerald, who I'd used for real estate transactions over the years, and who I knew also handled family law. I got his assistant. I left a message that I needed to speak with him about something urgent. I kept my voice level because that's what I do. Gerald called back within the hour. I told him what I'd found. He asked me several questions. Efficient and without drama. He told me to take screenshots of everything, to make no contact with Sandra about this, and to come see him the next morning. I said I would. Then I went to the back bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed that had been Caroline's side. Years ago. And then Sandra's, and I put my hands on my knees and I breathed. Gerald confirmed what I already understood but hadn't fully wanted to name. The transfers had gone to a personal account in Sandra's name only, and Sandra's opened in January at a credit union in Denver, where her sister lived. Denver, where Sandra had been for 6 weeks. On and off. Since March. I want to be direct with you, Daniel, Gerald said, leaning forward slightly. He had the manner of a man who delivered difficult news enough times to know that softening it often made it worse. This is textbook marital asset dissipation. She's been moving funds systematically, in amounts designed to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. She'd planned it. The amounts, never more than $40,000, were not random. She knew the thresholds. She'd worked in pharmaceutical sales for 20 years, managing complex regional budgets. She understood numbers. I thought about the chest pressure on the porch steps, the Tuesday in March, I thought about the fact that she had continued transferring money after I texted her from the hospital bed. There was a transfer for $31,000 dated the morning of my cardiac procedure while I was on a table with a catheter threaded toward my heart. Sandra had moved $31,000 out of our account. Gerald filed for divorce the next week and petitioned immediately for a freeze on all joint assets. A forensic accountant was brought in. The credit union account in Denver had Sandra's name, and one other authorized user, Robert. Her colleague, the one she'd mentioned with such careful casualness. I want to be honest about what the weeks after that felt like. Because I think there's a version of this story where I say I was strong, resolved. Certain. I wasn't. I was 63 years old, and I'd had a heart procedure 4 weeks before, and I sat in my house some nights, and the quiet that had always been mine felt like something else entirely, not peaceful, just empty. Marcus knew something serious was happening. I hadn't told him the full picture yet, but he's perceptive the way people are when they grew up, learning to read a quiet man's face. He came by one Saturday morning with coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Dad," he said. "I know." I said, "You don't have to handle this alone. I'm aware." He looked at me for a long moment. "Did she take money?" I told him everything. I watched his face go through several things. He's 40 years old and he's seen hardship. He lost his mother. He's built a business from scratch, but there's something specific that happens to a person's face when they learn that someone they trusted has betrayed a parent. Something that's harder to watch than anger. He put his hand on the table between us. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Claire flew in from Portland the following weekend. She stayed for 5 days. She's more expressive than Marcus. More like Caroline was. And she cried. And she wanted to call Sandra directly. And I asked her not to. And she respected that. Barely. She organized my kitchen because that's how she handles distress. And by the time she left, every cabinet was alphabetized in a way that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Sandra called me in the middle of all of this a Wednesday evening. 6 weeks after my procedure, she called my cell phone, which surprised me. Because Gerald had sent the formal divorce notice through her attorney by then, my attorney had advised no contact. I answered anyway. Her voice was different. The warmth that had characterized our early years, the ease of her, it wasn't there. Or maybe it had never been there as much as I'd thought. And I was only now calibrating properly. "I assume you've seen an attorney," she said. "Yes. I want you to know that I didn't plan for this to go the way it did. I waited. I wasn't happy." Daniel. For a long time, I didn't know how to say it. I thought about a lot of things I could say. I thought about $31,000 transferred the morning my heart was being repaired. I thought about her voice on the phone from the hospital. I hope the procedure goes smoothly, flat and even and careful. "Okay," I said. "That's all you're going to say. My attorney has advised me to keep this brief. Goodbye." Sandra. I hung up. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't satisfying in the way people imagine confrontations will be. It was just a door. Closing. The forensic accountant's report was thorough. Sandra had moved a total of $398,000 across 14 transactions. The account in Denver had been significantly drawn down. Robert's name on that account complicated things for her in ways her own attorney apparently hadn't anticipated. Part of those funds had been used to lease an apartment in Denver. Part had gone elsewhere that took longer to trace. Because we were in our state's equitable distribution framework, and because Gerald built a strong dissipation case, the divorce settlement required Sandra to return $260,000. She'd spent or transferred the rest in ways that made full recovery difficult. But the forensic accounting established a clear record that weighed heavily in every other aspect of the settlement. The house. The remaining retirement accounts. The outcome of what had been a complex 9-year financial entanglement, she did not get the house. I want to say something about the house, because I think it matters. It's not a large house. 3 bedrooms, A yard with a maple tree that I planted 20 years ago when Marcus was 20 and still thought I knew everything. Caroline picked that house. She walked through it and stood in the kitchen and looked at the window above the sink and said, "This one." And I said, "Okay," and we signed the papers that afternoon. It's mine in ways that have nothing to do with title or law. The fact that it stayed mine feels important in a way I don't have precise language for. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since the settlement, and I want to say it directly because I think it's something men of my generation aren't always good at saying, losing this much the money. The marriage. The version of the last 9 years I believed I'd been living at 63 is its own particular kind of hard, not worse than what younger people face. Just different. You have fewer rebuilding years in front of you. Your relationship with time changes after a cardiac event and a divorce happen in the same spring. You think about what you spent those years on, what you overlooked, what you were so steady and quiet about that you missed it entirely. I don't think I'll be in another relationship. That may change. But right now, sitting in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with the maple tree visible through the back window, it's not something I'm moving toward. I'm 63. I have good doctors. I have Marcus 12 minutes away and Claire calling on Sunday evenings and a neighbor named Bill who occasionally knocks on my door with food his wife sends over because she worries I'm not eating. I am eating. I'm also sleeping better than I have in years, which surprised me when I first noticed it. The house is quiet again, but it's a different quiet than the empty kind. It's mine. There are practical things I'd tell anyone facing what I faced. Get your finances separated if there's any sign of trouble. Don't share full account access without regular review. Know your numbers. Every month. The way an engineer knows a load-bearing structure, not because you distrust anyone, but because attention is its own form of care. Consult an attorney before you think you need one. The morning I called Gerald may have been the most useful 2 minutes I spent in all of this. My cardiologist cleared me for full activity 3 months after the procedure. I've been walking every morning 45 minutes. Sam route. Up the hill past the elementary school and back down through the old neighborhood where the houses are all from the 50s and the trees are enormous. I see the same people most mornings. A woman who walks her 2 dogs and always has the expression of someone who's running late. An older man who nods. A younger father who passes me at speed with a jogging stroller. Last week, Marcus met me at the turnaround point. He'd taken the morning off. He said he just wanted to walk. We went the whole route without talking much. He pointed out a house that had new siding. I noted that the elm at the corner was showing early signs of disease and probably had 2 seasons left. We went home and I made eggs and he ate them standing at the counter, the way he always has since he was 17. And then he left for work and I washed the plates and stood at the kitchen window. The maple in the backyard had new growth coming in on the lower branches. It does that every April, pushes out these small, bright leaves from places you'd forgotten were alive. I've been quiet my whole life. I've been told it's a flaw. I'm not sure anymore that it is. Quiet is how I found my way through 31 years of work that required precision. Through losing Caroline. Through raising 2 children who turned out to be good people. Through a cardiac procedure with no one in the waiting room. Quiet is also how I sat at that kitchen table, looked at the number on the screen, and knew exactly what I needed to do next. I did it, and I'm still here.